How's everybody doing? Let's try that one more time. How's everybody doing? Ah, there we go. That was a cold response because it's cold. Man, I came to California and I'm like, I thought it was supposed to be warmer, but it's chilly. So thank you all for coming out today. I'm excited to hear from Charles and Kat and just talk about this topic, which I think is near and dear to a lot of us who are, how many like early stage people are out here? Okay, lots. Okay, that's great. Having gone through this process myself and working with companies in our program, this is a really important topic, is like, how do we navigate the venture capital world? And it's just like startup world, it's changing. So we're gonna spend some time talking about that. So before we do though, Kat and Charles, can you just tell us a little bit about yourselves and the funds that you represent?
Sure. Well, I recently joined as the newest partner of Maveron. This is my 6th week on the job as a VC.
So that means she has tons of money.
But before this, I spent the last 6 years at Pinterest. I was most recently head of culture. I started out as an early product manager when we were about 40 people. Obviously stayed with the company, leading growth, marketing, and then culture to 1,500 people. And then before that, I was at Facebook for 4.5 years. And before that, software engineer. So varied career.
Cool. I'm the managing partner at Precursor. I started the fund about 4 years ago after about 5 years at SoftTech Uncork. We're very focused on pre-seed investing. We try to be part of that first institutional round with a check of $250K, and we invest all over North America in both B2B and B2C.
Great. So let me set the table a little bit here as we go into this discussion, because the landscape is changing. We've got a few like interesting trends right now, especially for an entrepreneur. I feel like we're saying this every year, like it's never been a better time, and in many ways it hasn't been a better time because there's a lot of resources out there with accelerators and incubators and communities like this. We're also seeing some interesting trends in like these mega funds, right? Like Jewel got like a bazillion, like 12 billion or something. And I was always surprised. I come from North Carolina, and Epic Games, Fortnite, which is a huge source of tension in my house, got like 1.2 billion, So we're seeing these really big rounds happening today. So let me just kind of start then. What have you guys seen as some of the biggest changes from the investor side over the past 2-3 years? I would say 5, but like that's old news. What's in the past 2 or 3 years? How have you seen that change?
You want to start?
Yeah,
sure, Charles,
I'll go first. I'd say the 2 biggest changes I've seen are there's just an unprecedented amount of capital available for high growth companies that want to remain private longer. And I think we don't yet know how that experiment's going to play out. I think the optimistic case is that the public markets, when these companies go out, will validate that the high prices paid for them as private companies were right. I sure hope, as an investor, I sure hope that's the case. I think probably more germane for folks in this room, it used to be that you did a friends and family round, then you did a Series A round, and then you're off to the races. Then you did a friends and family seed, Series A, and now we have friends and family pre-seed, seed, post-seed. And I just think the whole pre-Series A fundraising landscape has gotten so thin-sliced that as someone who admittedly is probably contributing to this problem, I worry a lot about what it means for cap tables and founder ownership, because every one of those rounds is another bit of dilution that the founders in the audience are going to take. Right. And ultimately, the only way I know how to make money as an investor is to make sure that the founders still have enough ownership and interest in the company that the outcome matters to them. So I worry a lot about what all of these fundraising rounds stacked on top of each other do in terms of founder ownership relative to investor ownership.
That's interesting, because then by the time it comes to because you're doing A rounds, what is your response to that? And then also, I'd love to hear your take on how you've seen this be a little bit different too.
Yeah, I think that as a result of there's being a lot of capital, there's a lot of competition. I mean, in some ways, it's not dissimilar from competition that happens in the ecosystem. When there's more, when capital becomes a commodity, what ends up being important is values and brand. And the way that we've thought about it as a firm is that if all the capital looks the same, how do we get really clear about what our values are? And how do we find the companies that align with those and will want to work with us because we're differentiated in that way?
Let me take that another step. How would you then, like practical advice, how would you advise a startup to get to know what your values are?
Yeah, I mean, we want to, I mean, we publicly have stated our values, right? And it's on the website. But more than that, I think that values have to be lived, right? And they have to be practiced. And we've been deliberate really internally about what those values are. Therefore, like we believe in non-normal founders. We also believe in profits and purpose, and that there's sort of a greater mission and purpose to the company that you're starting. We want to win the right way. And then we believe in relationships over transactions. So for us, like we think that it's really important that we build this relationship, and it is a long-term relationship at the Series A level,
right.
And that it's not transactional. And so for somebody who's just looking for capital or just looking for that transaction, then it might not be the right fit.
That's great, and we're going to come back to that because that's a really important point. Is this idea of relationships and how we weave that into our startups too. So kind of coming back to, I want to get your thoughts on this trend, right, of these big deals and how does that affect, because we got a lot of early stage people here. So I think it's like 90% increase in $100 million rounds this past year. Like that's a lot. So I guess this is a two-part question. Does this actually open up opportunities for early stage folks? And I know you hinted at, I don't know how this is gonna end. So Charles, can you tell me like, how does this help?
Yeah, I don't know
or influence maybe?
I don't know if it helps. So I'll tell you the way I think about all this. I think Mark Suster from Upfront had a really good post that he put lately. I think it was last week from the Upfront Summit, just talking about how much all of this capital has concentrated in a really small number of names.
Right.
And so I think the biggest issue we encounter as a fund dealing with early stage entrepreneurs is, on the one hand, you read these astounding numbers about hundreds of billions of dollars that have gone out in venture capital. So it feels like the world is awash in money, but almost all of that money seems to be crowding into a really small number of names. So it creates this weird paradox where as a founder, you read about all of this venture capital out there, but none of it's available for you. And so my whole theory is, as venture funds get bigger, you need to have bigger outcomes in your fund in order to make your returns model work, which means companies you would have backed previously that still might be big, but at the surface or at the time that you meet them are not obviously huge, are getting overlooked by the market today. And that's, I think, our opportunity as new early stage funds is to fill the gap that other people have left.
So what is your take where you're writing larger checks? What's your take on this big?
But similar to Charles, like we actually are incredibly disciplined. Like so, I think that for us, we've taken the approach of we're going to remain small. We're a $160 million fund, which is small in the Series A world.
Sure.
But we're very focused. We're a consumer tech only fund, and remaining focused in sticking to that size is what's going to allow us to continue to make the bets that we want to make in companies that I think many people ignore because it doesn't work for their fund portfolio.
So when we think about these big checks that are getting written, it's often done because we need fast growth, right? And so there's two things that happen because of that, I think, which is you have to build your team really, really fast, and that has a huge impact on the complexion of your organization. And then there's a lack of or maybe a tension that comes with what do I do with that money? So we chat a little bit about this backstage. So Kat, I know you have huge experience at Pinterest with leading culture. So how does a company grow and balance culture with the expectation of rapid growth because of the size of checks or even just desire to get to the market. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually don't think of it, maybe inherent in your question, it sounds like there's a little bit of a trade-off, and I don't believe there is one. I think culture, in some ways, is very much the operating system, the infrastructure, it's the foundation that allows you to go faster. And the most important thing, if you're getting started as a company, is being deliberate and intentional about it from the very beginning. Because if you don't, and you're not mindful about it, it can really lead to behaviors that are very inauthentic to who you are as a founder. And really, it's that like being authentic and having that alignment between who you are and what you want to build, and bringing those people together around a common set of values is very important.
Can you give us an example maybe of how, because I'm putting myself in the shoes of an early stage person, like, oh, I get it. Like, I want to be authentic and I want my team to be, how practically, how would one begin that process? Like if they could walk out of here today and go, I'm going to be intentional about my culture, what one or two things can they actually do to do that?
So I think it depends on the size and stage that you're at. When you're first getting started, it starts with your own personal values. And to me, it answers the questions of how do you want to work together, like as a team, right? How do you make decisions? Who's successful here? Like if you could think about who you want, like the sort of type of people or set of people that you want to hire going forward.
Right.
And then, and answering those questions sort of as an individual is very different than when you start to have customers. Then I actually believe, like in the case of our firm, like when we went through and built our own values, we actually talked to our founders. Because the founders indicate, or the bets that we've made indicate like what values we have, right? And you can't be inauthentic to that after you've started to do that. And so even at Pinterest, like we had talked to our pinners. Like why do they come to Pinterest? And then thinking about culture and values as you continue to scale feeds into your brand and what you represent. And so much of the world today, I think people make decisions on the products they buy, the things they use, based on what they believe in and the values that they have.
I think that's a big deal. And thinking about actually wrapping words around those things are really important so that you have a culture of language. And even on our own team, like we have a value that we say we resist passivity. And so we're trying to say, hey, how do we think about doing things on behalf of our customers instead of waiting for them to tell us, right? So things like that. So switching gears a little bit from culture, but the money side of the growth, what are some of the struggles that you see with companies that get really big checks? Jason at Basecamp is famous in his podcast for saying, big checks kills more businesses than it really helps, right? Because of expectations. I
mean, we deal with this a lot because most of the companies that we back, they start off with less than $1 million.
Right.
You can only get in so much trouble. You can only hire so many people. Your office can only be so big. Snacks at your office can only be so nice. It imposes a bunch of constraints on you.
Right.
And I think in some companies, the financial constraints end up being a really strong forcing function on what you choose to work on. And I've seen companies where when you remove that financial constraint, the logic of focus, it turns out was only driven by the money. That the team behind that company.
That's tweetable right there. The logic of focus was driven by money.
It happens where suddenly when you remove the financial constraint, you realize the team's ability to prioritize and say no to things goes away, because before when your engineering head would say, hey, I need another engineer, you would tell her we can't afford it. Now when the person says we need a new engineer, you have to have actually a real conversation around values, prioritization, how we want to spend money. And I think some people, you give them money and to Kat's point, the culture of the company changes. It goes from frugal to spendy. It goes from, I would say, tight to loose. There's a lot of things that can happen when you introduce money. And I've never seen anybody raise a bunch of money and intentionally screw up their company's culture.
Right.
But I've certainly seen it happen a bunch of times.
Right, yeah, no one sets out like, my goal this year is to ruin the company.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you one really tangible area where I see it happen. A lot of times startups will say, hey, it's really important that we get people to buy into our mission.
Right.
We don't pay top decile salaries here. There's a package of beliefs that we have around the people we want to join our company. And suddenly when you can afford to pay up for people, it causes people to say, well, now that we have the money, maybe we should revisit our policies or thoughts around comp.
By the way, really interesting. I'm hearing some words here from both of these guys about values, beliefs, culture, and in a way that it really needs as much time and focus as your product and everything else. So, so talking about, I guess, financial discipline, right? We're last year, massive amounts of investment. You know, the air seems to be that maybe 2019 is going to change. You know, are we in? And is the bear market going to affect this? I guess the question would be, Kat, do you see maybe a slowdown in investments this year or not? What is your take on how we look at the general air affecting this space?
I mean, at Maveron, we have this quote from Warren Buffett that we love. It's, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. Or maybe it's the opposite. And I think we believe that a lot of our best investments happened in bear markets. We made an investment in Zulily in 2009. I mean, Uber was started in 2009. Airbnb was started in 2008. Pinterest was also started right around that time period as well. And so I think in some ways we're going to continue to invest even if we hit a bear market.
That's good. That's good. Let me shift the question just a little bit. How would you advise, I guess, entrepreneurs to think about preparing, either for maybe a smaller check or tough times?
I would be really nervous today if I were running a business, if I were in a hyper-competitive segment where it felt like I had to spend to keep up with my competitors. So I would say my first rule would be try not to be in one of those businesses right now. I think if you think about what food delivery looked like probably 3 to 5 years ago, I'd say kind of what scooters look like to me right now as an outsider who's not an investor in the category. These are businesses that have really significant short to medium term capital needs. I think the hardest thing I've seen over and over again with founders is you look at your plan, you go, we're not wasting money on anything. Every dollar that we're spending is absolutely needed. And it's only when you're forced to cut that you realize, wow, we actually could have gotten by with 60% of what we were spending. There were things that felt essential and necessary, and when we took them away, the pain wasn't as drastic as we thought. So we have companies in our portfolio where I've told them, I was like, you're in range, you could get to cash flow break even. Maybe we should make that the goal. Maybe we should make that the near-term goal, because the fundraising environment has already been a little difficult for them. And I'm like, you're so close. If we prioritize getting to cash flow break even, you as a founder would control your own destiny. So at the margin, as a founder, when I have founders who are close and I think that their instincts are, it would give them great comfort to get there, I've started to encourage them to do that.
That's great. So let's talk about relationship then. That's a great segue. When you look, because you're often dealing with individual entrepreneurs or a very, very small team, not quite as mature. So how do you evaluate, or what do you look for in an entrepreneur when you make an investment?
God, I don't know what to say that doesn't sound totally cliche, but I'll try. I think the biggest thing I look for is someone who has a unique insight on the problem that they're going after. I think in a world where there is a lot of energy and enthusiasm around startups, as much as people talk about execution, I actually think having a good idea with a unique insight is still really important. It's not sufficient, but it is a big part of what we look for. And when I say unique insight, it has to be something that is not patently obvious the second I hear the company. So if someone said, hey, we're going to build a new sneaker brand, and I'm like, let me guess, you're going to take all of the money I give you, you're going to go buy a bunch of Instagram ads, and that's the model. There's tons of companies out there doing that, and I would question whether that person has an advantage relative to others in the market. So I'm always looking for someone who can tell me something, whether it's distribution, product, pricing, that feels like it's a tweak or a twist, but one that's durable.
Okay. That's really good. So Kat, how do you evaluate, so you're going to look at the founders very similarly, but you're also going to look at her supporting cast probably just as closely. What kinds of attributes do you look for when you guys evaluate teams?
Yeah, and so at the Series A level, we definitely look at who they hired and how that team works together. How do they prioritize? Because, ruthless prioritization is really needed with constrained capital. and that they continue to grow by really understanding their customers. And there is that customer love there that is organic, apart from them growing via paid marketing.
So we've got a couple minutes left, and by the way, these are great. I wish they gave us more time. Yeah. But I want to talk about some lessons learned. And a lot of times when we go to these stages, it's all like shiny and I'm amazing and every deal I do is great, but we tend to learn the most from the things we do wrong. So I would love to hear, like, what were some of your biggest misses and what did you learn from that? Or did you? I'm kidding. So Charles, like, maybe talk about a miss you had in either a company or, you know, when you were doing your own stuff, and how did you adjust? And
I guess I'll talk about a mistake that I definitely made.
By the way, I wrote down your biggest win, so I shifted on them a little bit.
As a founder, I think it's one thing when someone tells you intellectually that timing matters on a market. And my co-founder and I of our last company, we started an Android games company in 2010. And if you can go in the Wayback Machine and think about what Android looked like in 2010, there was no Pixel.
Right.
I'll put it to you that way. And it was really challenging. And we found ourselves in a market where there was no amount of money we could raise or spend that was going to cause the ecosystem that we were in to come together.
To work, right.
And so that just,
wow.
It just burned in my brain the importance of market timing. And sometimes you're lucky. Sometimes you start a company and something changes in the ecosystem the iPhone happens and you were trying to solve for location and mobility and this happens and it's a gift. In most cases, you're not that lucky. So I spent a lot of time thinking about market timing.
Did anybody tell you, hey, this isn't great timing?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah. I just didn't listen. I probably should have. But it's made me super sensitive to, I ask most founders, why shouldn't you have started this business 2 years ago, and why shouldn't you wait 2 years to start it? Because for the amount of money we give people, they need to be sort of plus or minus 12 months right on the market.
Right. It's really interesting. Like, we have to balance we have to balance swimming upstream when everyone says you're crazy. Like Safra Katz, our CEO, says, if everyone tells you you're crazy, you might be onto something.
That's right.
Right? And then you might actually be crazy. And so that's a fine line, and you have to be really thoughtful and seeking wise counsel. And so Kat, how about you?
So I had to go with something that, I can't say that, given that my short career in VC, that I've had a huge miss in the last 6 weeks. But I can say that as a product manager at Pinterest, so I led our growth team, and of course, like, one of the things I always talk about is that I helped our company get to 100 million monthly active users. But actually, like, one of the biggest mistakes and misses and failures I've had in my career is if you know me, I'm incredibly achiever-focused, competitive, and numbers-driven, right. And I focused too much on the numbers. Like, we optimized a ton to grow that quickly, but I think a huge miss that I had was not realizing that we weren't growing very well in the other countries in different markets, and we really had to change the way we thought about growth to focus on the customer. One big learning is just like really understanding what they loved about Pinterest, and then knowing how to recreate that same amazing experience for them. It wasn't about looking at dashboards, optimizing the numbers. It was user research, building great product flows, making sure there was content, and that was really hard work and a really hard learning for me.
That's good. So we got a couple minutes left. I want to ask you, you guys do these all the time. What are we not talking about that we probably should be? Because we hear similar things, right? And that's why I really appreciate this conversation, because we're talking about things that aren't being heard all the time. What are we not talking about that maybe we should be, Charles?
Oh, boy, I think the big thing I've been thinking about a lot is just, this is like a little esoteric. We have a lot of rules and best practices in venture that were set up for companies to go public in 7 years, for people to sort of join and stay for a really long time in terms of equity comp, in terms of what founders do. And I think a lot of these things have changed, and no one's really stepped back and said, if some of these companies are going to stay private for 10 or 12 years, the whole founding team's not going to be there, the whole executive team's not going to be there. there's a bunch of things I think we've been sort of making up on the fly around secondaries investing that I have a feeling we're going to go back and look at soon and say, if this is the new normal, and it stays this way, do all the rules and best practices we put in place, particularly around how we treat non-founder employees, do they still make sense?
That's really good, especially with these crazy looking cap tables now too, right? Like it's exactly right. Kat.
Oh, wow. Top of mind for me, and maybe this is more personal, is just like the income inequality in America and just wanting to find the problems or finding people who are solving those really, really tough problems. I think there's a ton of opportunity, and that's where I'm just trying to sort of search around and find like great companies that are focusing on tackling some of these really hard issues.
That's really great. I didn't ask her to say this, but it's a great segue too. So I wanted to take like 1 second to thank you guys for coming out,
thank you.
giving us those insights. I also wanted to point you to some of the work that we're doing, and one of the companies I'm most excited about in our portfolio is Gap Squared out of the UK, they use AI to focus on gender pay inequality in the enterprise. And so they've been extremely successful and trying to solve this really important problem. And so Oracle has a program, a startup program, open to B2B, B2C, born in the cloud companies who really want to understand how to grow and get on the global stage. So I encourage you to learn more. You can go to oracle.com/startup or really go see us in our booth, and we'd be grateful to talk to you. And we're very grateful that you gave us time this afternoon to come see us. So thanks.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks. That was great. Thank you. Thanks, Kat.
Yeah.